Number 10. Exceptional. Bailey Hoskins is known for being the worst X-Men ever, probably because his powers are pretty lackluster sounding, but managed to pack a pretty big bang when they do get used. Bailey's powers involve self-detonation, but the only thing is that activating his powers will actually also result in his death, meaning he can only use them once and doing so will kill him. However, he does end up doing this, and in doing so saves the world, or at least a world. His good friend and teammate Miranda has reality warping powers that are extremely powerful, propelling her into her own classification of mutant even, in terms of power level. But even then, this time around, it seems Miranda can't seem to interfere in this world at this time. It seems she needs some help from Bailey, and in sacrificing himself, he not only saves the world, but also seemingly helps Miranda to fix it and set it right again. Or potentially erase it. That's kind of what it looks like happens at the end. But maybe that's how you fix it. Just wipe it. Number 9. Funny Man. Funny Man is an odd superhero who is historically actually pretty significant, despite how weird he may seem. He's not just powerful for how much of a goofball he is powerful in a historical context, which I think means he deserves this spot. Also, I'm not sure if we've ever mentioned him on the channel. As far as I can recall, I haven't at the very least. Funny Man was a creation of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, after they both left DC and began what would become an epic and long-time legal dispute over the rights to Superman, not feeling they were being fairly paid their dues. And for those who don't know, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster are the ones that created Superman. Siegel especially was passionate about getting the rights to their character back. After leaving DC, they reconnected with former DC editor Vin Sullivan, who had started up his own comic book company, Magazine Enterprises. Jerry and Joe tried to create the magic of Superman again, but this time by teaming up to make something entirely different and new: Funny Man. Celebrating their love of comic book pranks and humor, Funny Man was comedian Larry Davis, who after a publicity stunt gone wrong, ends up actually catching a real-life criminal, and decides to become a bona fide superhero, using his jokes and funny pranks to apprehend and stop criminals. A wacky idea that sadly did not end up panning out in the end for Jerry and Joe, as the character only lasted 6 issues. Funny Man didn't have any powers, but he was miraculously and comically good at stopping villains with his antics, and sometimes even doing this completely by accident. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show your love for our channel on perhaps another platform, you can head on over to Facebook, click that like, it really does help us out here at the channel, and thanks if you've already done it. Number 8. Dead Girl. I think one of the weirdest things about Dead Girl is that her whole thing is immortality, as she's already dead and basically can't die, with her mutant powers activating only after her death. And yet she did die in the comics, possibly due to a disease which ultimately caused her to fall apart from decomposition. That is the one thing she's meant to be good at, not dying, and yet it happened. Because she's technically already dead. Fortunately, that didn't stop Dead Girl from going on adventures, and she currently still is doing so, even despite dying. Joining the newly reformed Static X as they battle against Zeitgeist Team Excellent. Dead Girl's power allows her to reanimate herself, parts of herself, and to communicate with ghosts and even temporarily resurrect the dead. Number 7. Hand suckers. On the hands. If you thought the plasma thing was weird, it only really gets weirder when it comes to Morbius in the Spider-Man animated series. In the animated series, Morbius not only needed plasma instead of just straight up blood to live, but he also had fangs that basically went unused? I know what you're thinking, but wait a minute, Amanda, hold up! Don't vampires feed on their victims using their fangs? Yes, in folklore they're either actually using their fangs to rend the flesh of their victims so they can basically feast on their blood, or in some cases they actually even feed through their fangs, using their especially long and pointed incisors like we would a straw. And in some cases, fangs have sort of like venom in them that sort of subdues their victim, depending on, which type of vampire we're talking about from lore. However, in the animated series, while Morbius does have fangs, he doesn't really use them to feast. In that respect, they are more there for visual clarity and effect. Instead, Morbius has tentacle-like suckers on his hands, which is how he feeds. Weird? You betcha. Number 6. Elasti Woman. Elasti Woman. I love Rita Farr. She is one of the members of DC's Doom Patrol. In the show Doom Patrol, Rita might struggle to utilize and control her powers, still afraid of them and of her appearance while using them, as well as becoming, permanently stuck in her kind of creepy elastic form that she has in the show. But in the comics, Elasti Woman has learned to master her abilities. Rita gained her powers while she, as a Hollywood actress, was working on a set in Africa. She was exposed to volcanic gas, which allowed her to change the size of her body and limbs at will, also having the ability to stretch her limbs. John Byrne's interpretation of the character was also able to alter the size of objects just by touching them. And the current Prime Earth continuity version of her also has shapeshifting abilities. I also feel like DC's Doom Patrol series does a great job of capturing what like shapeshifting or stretching powers would be like in real life, and kind of the whole horror and body dysmorphia aspects of them. Possibly it's one of the best live action interpretations of this kind of power set I have ever seen. Also, if you aren't watching DC's Doom Patrol, what are you doing with your life? Go watch it, it's so good.
At number 5 is Doorman. Okay, this is another one like Grasshopper that I genuinely think could have a chance at making an appearance in the MCU. Aside from his god-awful name and reputation as a pretty ridiculous hero, I think his power set and aesthetic are pretty dang cool. And no, he isn't super good at holding the door for people, he's actually got the ability to create portals as well as making himself totally intangible. And that pairing of powers actually matches up to being a pretty powerful combination. And tied in with his cool black and white color scheme, I honestly think that this guy can make an appearance in the MCU outside of a meme-like context. In the comics, he sacrifices himself to take down Maelstrom, but is revived as the Angel of Death, at which point he gets a major power boost. So perhaps this iteration as the Angel of Death could make an appearance, hinting at the backstory of having been Doorman in a previous life.
Number 4, Crazy Jane. Crazy Jane is a member of the Doom Patrol, and honestly, that is a great team to look at if you want to find some superheroes who are actually quite powerful but also just wonderfully weird. Jane is no exception to that rule. She's kind of like Marvel's Legion, who appeared only a few years before she made her debut over at DC Comics, first appearing in Doom Patrol issue 19 of the 1987 series, created by comic book writing legend Grant Morrison and masterful artist Richard Case. Crazy Jane is Kay Chalice, who within her has at least 64 personalities, each with their own personas and their own power sets. While this means she has a lot of power at her fingertips, the challenging thing is that Jane often struggles to find balance with the various personalities residing within her, and has demonstrated various levels of control over them, and they over her. Number 3, Vision loves Scarlet Witch because of Ultron? This is a weird theory that some people have in relation to Wanda and Ultron in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The belief here is that Vision, who was made by Ultron, loves Wanda, not necessarily because of his own feelings developing for her, although this does make a lot of sense just because, you know, his character development and that is what happens in the story, but because Ultron himself perhaps had feelings for Wanda. And as crazy as this theory sounds, and perhaps non-foundational as it sounds in relation to what goes on in those movies, the reality is it could be true, and here is why. In the Ultimate Universe, which serves to inspire much that we see in the MCU, Ultron is in love with Wanda, and it isn't any hidden love either. It's laid out in plain sight. Even weirder, obviously, is that Wanda isn't interested, as she is with her brother at the time, and Wanda's spurning of Ultron is what also apparently helps to turn him into a killer robot. Yeah, it's very different. Very fresh. Number 2, Metamorpho. Probably one of the strangest but also most powerful heroes out there is Metamorpho. Metamorpho made his first appearance back in 1965 in The Brave and the Bold issue 57, and has also been known as the Element Man in comics. He has a very unique and interesting power set that allows him to transform his body or parts of his body into any element. This also gives him a pretty unique look as well. Metamorpho isn't the only hero to exhibit these powers though. At one point we also had Element Girl, whose story ended up turning quite bleak in the end, I must say. She assisted Metamorpho on some of his adventures, and maybe if we do a part 2 I will tell you some more about her on that list. Number 1, Dupe. By far the strangest, yet kinda in a weird way most OP characters of all time from Marvel has to be Dupe. Okay, so he's at the very least the most strange, even if you don't agree that he's the most OP. And now we have his evil counterpart, Pood, in Excellent. Oh boy. Dupe is pretty powerful because he has some fourth wall shattering level of awareness and is able to actually move between panels in comics, existing not just within the page's panels, but also moving into the borders and margins of that page as well, which I think is pretty wild. He's also demonstrated some powerful magical abilities as well as super strength, speed, durability, and even the power to resurrect, without the help of the Five no less. Yeah, because because Dupe is also like associated with mutants, even though I don't really know if we've clarified if Dupe is actually a mutant, but he's definitely mutant adjacent at least.
At number 10 we have Hindsight Lad. Okay, there are going to be some joke characters on here, but I'm not messing around when I say that some of these extra weird ones would actually do well in the MCU, at least for a moment. For example, Hindsight Lad, although he's very silly and probably not meant to be more than a gag character in the comics, I think would be a very funny throwaway joke for the bigger Marvel fans. In the comics, Hindsight Lad is actually just computer programmer Carlton Lafroige, who tries to pass off the ability of learning from the past as a superpower to make it onto the new Warriors team. What's even dumber than the name is that he actually makes it onto the team and quickly becomes the least liked member. But I don't see the MCU taking the joke that far, but I could see a non-superpowered supporting character taking on the goofy mantle for a one-off joke. At number 9 we have Dupe. As silly as this character seems, he's not much more bizarre than Rocket Raccoon, and that character has proven to have made a seamless transition into the MCU since his debut in 2014. Okay, Dupe is a little sillier. He's an alien creature who looks like a green bean with arms and a face, but he has a huge range of powers and an actually pretty impressive strength level, giving him enough to hold up in a battle with Thor. He can shoot psionic energy and also use, get this, bass guitar to channel the power of the funk. He also uses a gun called the Ultimate Nullifier, which shoots bees, chainsaws, and bowling balls out of it. He's probably the weirdest character on this list in all respects, but maybe he would be a fun cameo in a battle set in space in an upcoming movie, or maybe just somewhere in the background for a second. Once again, I really think this character should only exist as a fun moment and not by any means be featured in any front-running role. I don't want to watch the MCU destroy their legacy any more than the next guy. At number 8 we have Phone Ranger. Okay, it's getting hard to keep up this charade that I actually want these characters woven into the MCU in any major way. I think it's fair to say that any of these heroes so far would be funny to see briefly just for the meme of it, but I don't want to pretend I'd actually want a Phone Ranger series or even a scene with him any longer than 2 minutes. Because this hero is literally a phone repairman with a mini spaceship. After an average phone repairman named A.G. Bell discovers a tiny ship trapped in one of the phones he's repairing, he gains access to every communication system in the world. This isn't the most compelling power set or origin story, but I don't know, maybe we could even just see an homage to this weird superhero when Ant-Man flies a tiny ship out of a telephone speaker or something, I don't know.
Number 7, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur make for a great pair, especially as Moon Girl's power set allows her to swap her consciousness with Devil Dinosaur's consciousness. An oddly specific but super powerful ability. Moon Girl, aka Lunella Lafayette, actually has inhuman lineage and gained her abilities after undergoing Terrigenesis. Aside from that, she is also a super genius, and despite her young age, is likely one of the most brilliant and gifted minds that we have in the Marvel Universe. Also, when we're talking about weird power sets and weird heroes who are also super powerful, Moon Girl really fits the bill, as even outside of being a superhero, she's identified as a kind of oddball her entire life. In fact, she was super nervous about undergoing Terrigenesis because of this. Although she has embraced her weirdness, she was worried that this would just be another thing that would make her stand out more and turn her into even more of a freak than she already was. Aw, Lunella. I identify a lot with Moon Girl. I feel like she's such a cool and underrated character.
At number 6 we have Glob Herman. With hints at mutants appearing in phase 5 of the MCU, we may be able to see some X-Men in the MCU pretty soon. Now, I don't think they'll be rushing to get Glob Herman on the big screen before Wolverine or Magneto, let's say, but there's a chance that if they really dive into the X-Men storylines and characters, we can expect to see a whole slew of new characters, and maybe Glob Herman will make a cameo. Glob has a thick layer of wax instead of skin, which is transparent and allows you to see his skeleton and organs moving around in there. But he isn't entirely useless and is actually known to be relatively important as a character in the comics. He can light himself on fire and fling hot flaming wax at his enemies, which isn't an awful power set, but it's also pretty bad.
Number 5, Mutants No More. What would a weirdest things list for Marvel be without me mentioning my extreme dislike of of Brotherhood of Evil Mutants originating members Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver being retconned as non-mutants. This all went down in Axis, where it was revealed via a retcon that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver had never truly been mutants or Magneto's children, but were basically tricked into thinking so based on the High Evolutionary experimenting on them when they were young. Once the High Evolutionary was done with them, he discarded them, disguising them genetically as mutants. Wanda found out about this when she attempted to put a blood curse on her relatives, only to discover that it worked on Pietro, but not on Eric. So yes, Eric is not the father, but he still basically was with them the whole time and then was like, by the way, I'm your dad, and now he's not. I think we can still count it, even though they're not blood related, but they should be blood related. It hurts my brain.
At number 4 is Squirrel Girl. Probably the most competent member of the Great Lakes Avengers, Squirrel Girl actually has a decent chance to appear in some iteration in a future MCU project. At first glance, she seems like a pretty silly character sporting a big furry squirrel tail and ears, but she actually has a pretty decent power set on top of it, including super strength, night vision, a healing factor, and superhuman leaping. She's also adept with computers and communications, so even if we don't see her on the battlefield, it's possible she appears in the control room of some SHIELD operation at some point. I don't know, Squirrel Girl is a cult favorite, and out of all the weird characters on this list, she's probably one of the most respected out of all of them.
Number 3, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is also one of the most ridiculous heroes when it comes to her premise and her power set. Although really what makes Squirrel Girl, aka Doreen Green, so strong of a hero, so powerful of a hero, and of a character is her likability and her approach to heroism. She has a tendency to beat villains by befriending them and persuading them to stop their devilish and deadly plots. Although she has also summoned an army of squirrels in the past to help her take down even some of the most famous and notorious villains, like early on in her career when she handily and embarrassingly defeated Dr. Doom. Squirrel Girl has also faced off and defeated the likes of Thanos and Galactus as well. I love Doreen Green. I want to be Doreen Green. She's so great.
At number 2 we have Marrow. A former member of the X-Men, Marrow is another example of a sort of weird character that we can imagine being featured in one way or another in an upcoming MCU project. Definitely not in this phase, since they haven't yet included X-Men in their rollouts as of yet, but maybe in phase 5 they'll dig deep and feature some more niche X-Men like Marrow. Her powers are basically that she can grow her bones on command. Well, at first it isn't on command really, she is actually known at first to have very little control of her powers, leaving her overtaken by the extreme growth of bone matter from within her body, which is sort of gross and terrifying, but perhaps that could be used in a cool way for the MCU. Maybe Marrow is facing challenges controlling her powers throughout one of the movies, and only when Professor X helps her hone them does she come through as a Deus Ex Machina at the end of one of the movies. I don't know, something like that. She's not even that weird, honestly. I just genuinely think I'd like to see her in an MCU project. At number 1 we have the one and only, my all-time favorite, 3D Man. If you've watched my other weird heroes lists, you'll know by now that I'm a huge fan of 3D Man. Is that ironic? Is it a serious claim? You can't tell. Well, honestly, it's a bit of both. Primarily, I just love the idea of a hero that's 3D themed with absolutely no relationship to anything 3D whatsoever. Something about the character being stuck in the early 2000s when 3D had hit another golden age, sporting a green and red suit and the whole thing, something about that just makes me laugh. So that's the ironic side, but honestly, I think this character could be explored further. Delroy Garrett Jr. grew up as a track and field star, competing in the Olympics and the whole 9 yards, no pun intended. But I feel like there hasn't been a hero that's, before anything else, an athlete. Unless you count Spider-Girl. I guess Spider-Girl was an athlete in school, but she hasn't been in the MCU. But I just feel like this could be a cool opportunity for Marvel to offer more representation to the athletics community. That, and how 3D Man's whole vibe is lost in time, and it would be so cool and maybe a bit refreshing to revisit that retro early 2000s era at some point on the big.
Number 10, Baby Inheritors. We've gone into the Spider-Verse multiple times in the comics now, and we are about to go back again. Supposedly one last time. We'll see what happens. But I'm sure nothing can top the weirdness of how the last Spider-Man multiversal crossover ended. In the first Spider-Verse in the comics, the Inheritors were the group of villains that the Spider Totems of the multiverse had to band together to fight. At the end of that event, they defeated them, but then oddly enough, they returned again via Superior Spider-Man, aka Otto Octavius' tech. The Inheritors inheritors manage to clone themselves and make a comeback in Spider-Geddon, once more uniting the Spider Army to come together and defeat their threat to the multiverse. The inheritors are basically energy vampires who specifically prey on animal or insect-inspired totemic beings, like spider totems. Spider totems are basically people across the multiverse with spider-like powers and abilities who were destined to become spider-themed heroes and protect their world. At the end of Spider-Geddon, the inheritors are defeated by being turned into baby versions of themselves and given to Spider-Man, Aunt May of Earth 3123, to raise to be good. Because that's how you defeat villains sometimes. Sometimes you just gotta raise them yourself. Number 9. Feed me plasma. One of the weirdest things, especially here on the internet, is everyone's obsession with Morbius feeding on plasma and not human blood. I mean, the amount of times I've talked about Morbius drinking blood and people on the internet have been like, actually it's plasma. It's an insane amount. People really love the plasma. This doesn't actually come from the comics though, but instead is something that grew out of the Spider-Man animated series. And it came to be thanks to censorship, of course, like with so many weird things that we have, because isn't that just always the way? Morbius, being a vampire on basically a children's animated series, wasn't allowed to be shown feeding on blood because it was considered too violent. So instead they had Morbius thirst for plasma. That way you can get around the whole blood thing, although plasma, of course, it's in blood. Plasma is the liquid portion of your blood that contains mainly water as opposed to the other portions of your blood, which is primarily made up of red and white blood cells as well as platelets. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list here and you are loving what we do on the channel, please head on over to Facebook. You can follow us there and we have more exciting content coming your way and some exclusive things planned for you in the future, we hope. Number 8. Fin Fang Foom's diaper. Speaking of censorship, I have another strange one for you. This one comes from the comics, and we have the Comics Code Authority to thank for it, of course. Thanks, CCA. Thank you so much. Fin Fang Foom is a dragon that is well known in the comics. Recently in the MCU, we actually thought Fin Fang Foom might appear in Shang-Chi based on merch, only to learn that the dragon there was actually instead known as the Great Protector, so that was not Fin Fang Foom. In the comics, I recently saw Fin Fang Foom in the pages of Marauders, where he pops up before the original team dissolved, with Iceman actually fighting Foom before deciding to take a vacation from his work on the team, eventually leaving the Marauders completely once they rebooted that series. Well, I mean, at least he's gone for now. Bobby might be back later, but for now, he's out. Fin Fang Foom has years of history, and a good chunk of those years he spent in a purple diaper. Why? Because the CCA was worried about the dragon's indecent exposure. I'm not joking here, guys. That's what they were like. They're like, he's gotta wear pants. He's up there, he's naked. And it is for the reason of dragon modesty that he was forced to wear his iconic purple diaper or boxers or shorts, depending on, of course, who's drawing him and, you know, how you, as the person reading and looking at the comic, want to interpret that garment that he was forced into wearing.
At number 7, we have Grasshopper. This guy is known as a bit of a loser in the comics, having been killed off a handful of times in pretty embarrassing ways. But despite this, and despite the fact that he's based on a much less cool insect than Spider-Man, I think he has some potential. Even if he's kept as a sort of B character, I think he could fit into the MCU in some weird way. I think his costume isn't badly designed, and, well, that's kind of it. I think he could do for a modernization upgrade, but maybe one of the Marvel heroes' out of touch parents could take on the mantle for a bit, or an annoying older brother or something like that. He only joins the Great Lakes Avengers in the comics, so maybe in the future an MCU version of the Young Avengers could come across the GLA and we can catch a glimpse of Grasshopper.
Number 6. Clone Saga. Some people love it, some people hate it, but if you had to collect it or organize it into a trade, all of us were likely confused by it. Even to this day, the Clone Saga remains a hard story to follow because it spanned so many different Spider-Man comics, and because we had so many Spider-Man comics. The Clone Saga is a story where Spider-Man ends up being cloned by his nemesis, the Jackal, and then upon meeting his clones begins to question if he is actually the original Peter Parker or merely a clone himself. A lot of people are not fans of the Clone Saga because of the story's twist at the end, which many felt made the emotional investment that they had put in during the crossover story feel worthless in the end. Number 5. Multiple Man. Multiple Man has a strange and yet awesome power. He can create duplicates, often referred to as dupes for short, of himself, and use them to do and learn all sorts of things. Why learn? Well, because when he absorbs these duplicates back into himself, he also gains all their memories and knowledge. As long as he gets to absorb them back, that is. We've seen a lot of weird stories with Multiple Man because of this part of his unique power set, including one where he had a baby with his girlfriend Siren, but because he had actually sent a dupe to sleep with her on the night the child was conceived, when he first went to hold their newborn child because it was actually a product of a dupe, it got absorbed back into him. Lots of weird things about that. Well, that whole scenario. And then there was the time that he secretly sent a dupe posing as him, I mean technically they're all him, but you know, they're not the real him, to hang out with Layla and their son together, Davy, when Davy took his first steps. This dupe tragically died during an attack on Madrox's lab in X-Corp, so he wasn't able to actually absorb him back, and therefore lost those memories forever. Ooh, sad, weird. Kinda awful, Jamie. I love when people are always like, man, Jamie, why are you always sending dupes to hang out with me? And Jamie's response is just like, I mean, technically the dupes are me, so like, you're just hanging out with me. Number 4. Ultimate Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. One of the weirdest things that we've seen to this day comes from the recesses of the Marvel multiverse. Because of course it does. The Ultimate Universe is the universe of Earth 1610, which was created to be its own world and separate line from the main continuity, focused on making Marvel Comics more accessible to new fans while offering established fans a fresh take on their favorite characters, many of which were either more grounded or gritty or some combination of those two. In the case of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, I definitely say we got something unique, but not in a good way. While Wanda and her brother Pietro have always been close in the 616 continuity, 1610 took this to another level, with the two siblings having an implied romantic relationship. Yeah, not necessarily what we expected or wanted from a fresh take on these characters.
At number 3 we have Howard the Duck. We all know that back in 2014 Marvel gifted viewers with one of the best memes of the year with a fake post-credits sequence suggesting that there'd be a Howard movie coming out in the MCU. Of course, this was just a poke at how silly the idea would be, and I agree. I just think that now, with all the fan service that has been done over the last few years, it's possible that we get to see this little dude again at some point. All joking aside though, Howard the Duck has appeared in so many Marvel events in the comics at one point or another that his wiki is actually up there with one of the longer reads out of any hero I've read. From the Fear Itself storyline to Original Sin, Marvel Comics often takes any interdimensional event as an excuse to bring back Howard for a laugh. So why wouldn't they continue to do so in the MCU? I bet the Guardians of the Galaxy post-credits scene wasn't the last we'll see of this very serious detective. And the 1986 feature film with a 14% on Rotten Tomatoes does not count.
Number 2. Ruins. The multiverse is full of disturbing realities, but none so disturbing, I don't think, as Ruins. Marvel's Ruins was created by Warren Ellis with beautifully haunting artwork by Therese and Cliff Nielsen and Chris Moeller. The story that allows us to see into this world is only 2 issues in length, and yet based on the content in here, it does feel much longer. This is because Marvel Ruins is a parody of the Marvel Universe, where Ellis imagines what the heroes and villains would be like in the real world. It's bleak and disturbing, with many superpowers being practically explored in a way that turns them into more of a curse than a blessing. Number 1. Sins Past. Maybe one of the weirdest things in all of the cosmos and across multiple realities actually comes from the main reality of Earth 616. This awful thing has since been retconned away, but it still happened, and you can still go back and read it, and likely be traumatized by reading it upon doing so. That's right, we are talking about Sins Past. In this story, Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn were given added history. Doesn't sound so bad, yeah? Until you learn that this added history involved them being in a relationship together, a secret relationship where Norman got Gwen pregnant and was her first intimate lover. And as a result of their affair, they had 2 twin children who grew up to become goblins themselves. That's all I got. That's it, man. I'm just gonna throw my hands up to that because that's insane. Initially, of their children, Gabriel was known as Grey Goblin, and later on both Sarah and Gabriel will disguise themselves as the villain known as Kindred, which happened more recently in the comics. Don't worry though, we'd later learn that these 2 were actually just unstable clones, as opposed to being the true naturally born children of Gwen and Norman and their love affair, who fortunately were re-retconned as having never been romantically together. Thank goodness. Thank you, Nick Spencer. Thank you for fixing it.